Alexis, Texas. This hangout is on air and it is live. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's week 4 of the preseason and it's the Audible Live, the footballguys.com podcast. Cecil Lammy and Sigmund Bloom. Hey, Bloom, you got those live reads ready? Seriously, because we've got a great show lined up for you tonight. Of course, with me, Cecil Lammy. Sigmund Bloom is back, although he's heading out right out the door to the airport as soon as the show's over, or close after that to head to Colorado. Because Fish loves dicks. Bloom, good evening.
Yes, very happy to be back in your home state in less than 24 hours. In the meantime, we will talk some fantasy football. 4th preseason week, a few things going on, and it's a calm before the storm. I've been saying this week, it's the moment of truth. You have to commit. It's time to commit. You have no choice. The big drafts are coming up, and this last week, I think we've all had a few shifts. But I feel like this preseason, I've probably had the least player movement on my board of any preseason. I guess as I do this longer, I feel like I'm like an old dog. It needs to be some loud noise or something to get me up out of my slumber.
Squirrel! Matt Waldman. By the way, perfect that when I go to Matt Waldman tonight, jumping on board the Hangout, he's listening to jazz. That's just so perfect, because he's perfect. He's Matt Waldman. Matt, welcome in. It is week 4 of the preseason, buddy. And as Bloom said, you know, you do this long enough and you figure out, okay, how much do I take out of this? Well, it's week 4 of the preseason. As Pat Kerwin told me out of Broncos camp, I don't pay attention to that. Shut your mouth. So, Matt, welcome.
He doesn't play any dynasty leagues, though, so I'm sure he doesn't pay attention to any of that. I wouldn't pay attention to it either if I didn't play in any dynasty leagues. So, I mean, that's about the only thing I want to do is take a look at some of these young guys who aren't going to see, you know, basically aren't going to lift their behinds off the bench for most of the season, you know. So that's really what that's good for. But otherwise, you know, I got to agree with Bloom. I mean, not a huge number of changes. I mean, you know, certain guys you kind of stick your neck out with, and then the window falls down on them, and you kind of have to pull them back from the sill a little bit. I've had to do that a couple times with some of my rankings, but not too much.
And then, of course, Dr. Gene Bramall. You just saw him there because he's sneaky and he has great hair. Dr. Gene, we're going to talk plenty of injury news with you tonight, brother.
I'm looking forward to it. I'll try not to be a distracted drafter as we go.
Troy Polamalu.
Do you have the audio on? Please tell me yes. I know you don't want it on, but please.
All right. Do we want
shouty?
David? Yeah, here we
shouty.
Go. Shouty it is. All right, here we go. All right, I'm on the clock, so this will tell you. Shouty's going to make my pick for him here.
Okay.
Actually, you probably won't hear it because it's mine. So, well, maybe you did. Did you hear that?
No, did not hear that. I saw.
Was it a quarterback? Yeah, exactly. It had to be a quarterback.
It wasn't a quarterback. It was Jared Boyd. Did you hear that one? Yeah. See, you may not be hearing it now.
Okay. Well, turn.
I'll leave it on just in case.
Who was the pick?
I took Jared Boykin in the 12th round.
Oh, excellent.
Very good.
Thank you very much.
Very good.
Held off Devontae Adams, and Ted Thompson had glowing things to say today.
Yes, very much so. And, of course, it's that time of year, preseason wrapping up, time for the regular season. And we're going to stand on the table, fellas, because as Bloom said, it's time to put your chips down, standing on the table, and, of course, go through the injury news and notes with Dr. Gene Bramall. Let's go ahead and start there because Gene's drafting, and I don't want to totally distract him from those drafts tonight. So, Dr. Gene, we'll start with you. And we'll, you know, give you a little break and then come back in with the Twitter questions a little bit later. I'm obviously going to start in Denver with Wes Welker. All the news that we've been hearing since the original injury has been very positive about Welker's availability. Your thoughts here, Dr. Gene, with what we know now and how it seems less severe than originally thought?
Yeah, I think I'll probably draft better if you distract me. So distract me away. If not, at least I'll have a built-in excuse for the end of the year when I finish 4-10 again for various and sundry reasons. But Wes Welker, yes, indeed. We heard today that he was throwing passing trees with Peyton Manning, which Shouty is going to distract me here, so I'm turning Shouty off. If you can't hear him, I can. Shouty in my ear. Wes Welker doing the passing tree today means that he's pretty far along in the exercise program. It may be stage 3 or stage 4, but what we know is that once they get to that time of the exercise program, that they're very close to being cleared for contact. And from what Mike Kliss said last week, as we talked about, and some of the other things we've heard, most of the signs have been positive. And no, that doesn't mean that he's absolutely going to be cleared for contact in time to play next week, because he's got to pass that stage still, and there can be recurrence of symptoms at any point. We saw that with a number of players last year, Jordan Reed included. So hopefully things will continue to progress well, and Wes Welker will be clear to play. What it does show us is that they're moving him through that protocol within about 24 hours per phase, and that means that they're not lengthening each phase as we go. In other words, they're okay to clear him at 24 hours if he doesn't have symptoms from the next stage in that progressive return to play protocol. So he may be cleared for contact early next week, being ready for practice. We may see him taking full contact practice as early as Wednesday of next week. So things are looking better. That doesn't necessarily mean that he's more likely to avoid concussions or less likely to avoid concussions for the rest of the season, but it is a better sign that he may be ready for week 1.
Dean, I got to jump in and ask you one specific follow-up to that. Should we read anything into the fact that he got a concussion even though he was wearing the helmet?
No.
The special helmet?
No, the special helmet, there may be some special factors in that helmet that are a little bit cushioned or that minimize the rotational aspect of how concussions happen, but no helmet is going to prevent a concussion. Helmets are primarily designed to make sure that you don't get skull fractures, don't get bleeding around the brain in a large amount where it presses on the brain itself.
Make football sound so much fun.
Yeah, but it doesn't prevent smaller brain bruises, because we talk about this a lot. It's the rotational component that happens. It's the deceleration of the brain into the skull, and you can't stop that with any helmet. It's just physics. So that, as we talked about with Kliss, I think I talked about it on Twitter, and we probably sent some emails about it as well. I think it's a reasonable point to consider whether or not that helmet may or may not have helped him. But once you get a concussion, the concussion is there. There's really no way to know whether it could have been made lessened by whether or not he's wearing a helmet or not. And the same thing goes. I wouldn't push out there that, yes, he's wearing a concussion helmet, so he's less likely to get one. We've already seen him 3 weeks into the preseason get one wearing that helmet. So week to week at this point, hopefully he's fully healthy when they clear him to come back and play, and he can avoid whatever it is that he does to put himself in position to get more concussions in the future. Hopefully we'll see him healthy.
So I guess that's my turn since you did the follow-up. So I'll go ahead and ask this if I can. Let's talk a little bit about Cam Newton. I mean, certainly, first we were worried about the ankle and foot. Now it looks like that we have a hairline fracture. Tell us a little bit about that, whether it's just pain management or whether there's something more to be worried about here.
Yeah, it's mostly pain management. I think in Newton's case, it's probably better that it's around the back side than the front. Any injury to the ribs, be it cartilage, cracked ribs, broken ribs, multiple ribs, is going to be painful when you turn, when you move, when you take a deep breath. So yes, pain control is going to be a major issue. But even though this injury happened because he happened to get stepped on just between the parts of the flak jacket that were a little bit open, not a harness, but keeping that flak jacket padded is going to help him as well. So, I think one of my concerns with this particular injury was whether or not they'd allow him to condition that much, because the heavy breathing might put some stress around that area where the ribs are working a little bit harder, and it could allow the inflammation to continue a little bit longer and prolong the healing process. So I'm still hopeful that he's able to work through that last little bit of soreness in the ankle. This may be a little bit of a setback from that standpoint too. But I don't think there's much question that Newton's going to try to play in week 1 with just a cracked rib. They'll pad him up. They'll be able to shoot some painkillers in that area come week 1. I expect him to play.
Dr. Gene Bramall from footballguys.com. Of course, follow him on Twitter at Gene Bramall. And there's the physical side, and then there's the mental side. And a lot of fantasy owners have been going mental. Let's segue. About Robert Griffin III. Robert Griffin III out there, Ron Jaworski saying he's regressed, and everyone saying we may have seen the best from him. Of course, the physical ailments, he's got to stop getting hit. You got to slide, Bobo. Slide. Okay, make it happen. The mental side, Dr. Gene, if we can delve into that, when recovering from that type of knee injury, you don't want to change your playing style, but you definitely have to get smarter about the way that you play, and you have to stop really thinking about it. And it seems, just outside looking in, that that's still a trouble spot for RG3.
Yeah, I think it is. Regardless of what Jaworski is saying in terms of how what his mechanics look like. I think it's clear that he doesn't trust his base just yet. He doesn't trust his footwork, doesn't trust his legs. He trusts them enough to get out of the pocket, but I think he's still a little bit concerned about the trash that's in and around his legs, guys falling into him. We saw that happen with Sam Bradford last week. That can't be good for Griffin's psyche either. Again, we're speculating here that may be part of the problem. It may be something as simple as the knee doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel right when he plants. It doesn't feel right when he pushes off. It doesn't feel right when he takes that step up or laterally in the pocket. It may not be mental as much as it is physical, or more likely it's going to be a combination of both. The difficulty thing with Griffin here is that we're going on a good 18 months or more after the injury at this point. We know he had an LCL that was damaged. We know he's had 2 ACL injuries to the same knee. That knee, at this point, I think there's a good argument to say that it may never be the same again. Now, is a 95% or a little bit less than that RG3 good enough to perform in the NFL? I think the answer to that is yes, but hopefully his offensive line improves and he gets a little bit more comfortable in the pocket. It's going to be a difficult thing to do. As we talked about, as we started to see concern with RG3 last year in week 4 or week 5, that early part of the season, that's a difficult thing to do in live action when the adrenaline's running against first-team defenses on Sundays. So hopefully that's something he's going to be able to work through. If not, if we don't see progress in the first couple of weeks, it's going to be hard to see that progress for the rest of the year, I think.
Gene, I know you haven't got to see him yet, but Aaron Dobson played tonight, made some plays tonight. Basically looked like Aaron Dobson. It was a long journey back, longer than expected, but he was back on the field. I know it's the 4th preseason, and we try not to read too much into specific takes from these games, but in his case, it was more of a binary yes/no, is he ready thing, not so much a how ready is he because of how long it took for him to get back. So does this put him back in consideration for our 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th round picks, those upside wide receivers?
Well, I think it puts him back in consideration whether or not you think Ken Burrell-Tompkins or somebody else is the guy instead of Aaron Dobson is worth considering. But I think you addressed the right issue there. It's kind of a is he able to run and cut? And the answer to that is yes. But I do think, we talk about reconditioning injuries so often. He's still got a little bit of a troublesome period here over the next week or so as he continues through these full contact practices and his first couple of games in the regular season when he really lets it go at 100%. Is he going to be able to avoid any muscle strains, whatever they may be? But I think, you're right, I haven't seen him yet, but from what you're telling me, if he looks like he can run and cut, that's definitely reason to at least put him back on your draft boards if you thought he was the better option than Ken Burrell-Tompkins and those other guys before you knew that he wasn't going to come back on time.
Gene, let's talk a little Jeremy Hill, who exited the game tonight with a elbow injury. I know that certainly there's a lot of speculation as to what that possibly could be, and you were drafting, so you might not have seen what exactly happened. But if you could talk a little bit about the range of injuries that happened to the elbow, and with a running back, whether or not that would be what would be the most serious, and that would be something that wouldn't be anything to worry about.
No, I'm looking forward to seeing what that injury looked like on film. Sometimes it's easy to get if there's enough of a look, you can see what the injury mechanism is and guess a little bit. Haven't seen it yet. There's enough on Twitter suggests that it was a hyperextensive injury. With the elbow bent back a little bit, that can mean the elbow comes out of place. That can mean ligament sprains. It can mean just a little bit of a bone bruise. The Bengals listed him as probable at halftime to come back. Now, that was never going to happen. Probable in this case means out for a guy like Jeremy Hill, who's going to be an important part of that offense. But we know that the Bengals aren't necessarily always straightforward about these things, so hopefully we'll see him back at practice. If I see anything in the video replay that makes me confident enough to say it might be this, might be that, I'll definitely let everybody know on Twitter. For now, let's hope that it's a minor hyperextension injury as it was billed, that he truly was probable to come back, and if it had been the regular season, he would have been back in the second half, and then we'll address it from there if we hear worse things as the week progresses.
He's Dr. Gene Bramwell, footballguys.com, on Twitter at Gene Bramwell. Let's go a couple of more times around the loop because there's so much to get to, and we are in the meat of it. We're in the thick of everything in the draft season, and all the Patriots camp notes that we've heard have been very positive in saying no setbacks for Rob Gronkowski. Now, they haven't been as positive when talking about Stephen Ridley, but with Gronkowski, no setbacks here. Of course, not in the final preseason game, of course. Nobody expected that. What should fantasy owners be expecting from Gronkowski week 1? You know you're starting him. You drafted him, likely with a premium pick. You throw him in the lineup. What kind of expectations would you have for Gronkowski, Dr. Gene?
I think I would conservatively expect him to take about half of his usual snaps, but be there in high leverage situations. So they'll use him in Gronk packages, and they'll use him on third downs. They'll use him around the red zone. They'll use him in critical late game situations. But you're probably not going to see him out there other than as a decoy for some of those other snaps. I think he probably gets in a good 20 to 40 meaningful snaps, and that might be enough. We saw this with Jimmy Graham when he dealt with his plantar fascia issue in the middle of last year. He played about 30 snaps. Had 5 or 7 targets and 2 touchdowns. So I think that's a conservative expectation for Gronkowski. If he has a very good week of practice and he feels good and the game flow suggests and he's feeling okay in that first week, we may see more. But I don't know that I would expect 60 snaps and 10 targets for Gronkowski until we're somewhere into the first month of the season, week 3, week 4 at the earliest. Hopefully it's sooner than that, but I don't know that we're going to see that until sometime between week 3 and week 6.
So, Gene, basically, just to put a fine point on that, a sharp point, if Gronkowski is active week 1, I mean, what you play Graham and Cameron and maybe, and of course Julius Thomas. I mean, or was that what we're looking at if Gronkowski's active?
Yeah, I think so. I think with the RG3 issues, I'm not sure I would put Jordan Reed there. And everybody else underneath him, yes, I think Kyle Rudolph could have a good year. Vernon Davis can have big games. But if you have Gronkowski on the roster, if you're in a redraft league, you probably took him in the 2nd or 3rd round. If he's active, you start him. And I think if he's active, they're not going to put him in an inline blocking situation. They're not going to use him primarily as a decoy. I wouldn't expect. I suppose the decoy is possible, but if he's active, I'm going to recommend starting him.
Gene, Sam Bradford, is he ever going to play again?
Yeah, I think he will. It's unfortunate that he's had an ACL injury to the same knee. We've seen RG3 come back from this injury in addition to an LCL. We've seen Thomas Davis come back from this injury. There's been other guys in the past, Frank Gore, Willis McGahee, where they've had multiple reconstructive surgeries to the same side. I think Sam Bradford can come back from this. Obviously, it's not going to be until 2015. But I think, barring something unusual happening in his rehab or the Rams cutting bait with him, which is not something I would expect at all. I think he's going to have a job next year, and I think hopefully he'll come back healthy this year. He's going to have the benefit of nearly 12 months to prepare and get over what's going on. There weren't any other associated injuries, as can sometimes happen with repeat injuries. Hopefully it'll be a fairly straightforward procedure when they get inside the knee, and he'll be able to come back and play.
Dr. Gene, one more round of questions for you, if you will, kind sir, and then you'll be allowed to draft for just a small window. Steven Jackson with the hamstring, now he's back in practice, and there was a thought that he could play a few snaps to test out that injured hamstring. Anything that we've reported, and again, we have to go off the reports, D. Orlando Ledbetter, our guy D out there in Atlanta, so we're looking in, trying to read the tea leaves here, and with Jackson, the tea's sour, man. It's bad. And, yeah, maybe the hamstring holds up for a little bit, but based on what we saw last year, based on the hamstring bothering him most of this preseason and training camp, what would you be expecting from the old man Jackson and the bum hamstring?
Yeah, correct. And it's not just the hamstring. It's the risk of a quad, of a groin, of any number of other muscle injuries that he's had in the past as he reconditions. Or, we've seen him, where he's had a couple of good weeks after he's finally recovered from whatever muscle injury he had recovered from most recently, and then gets another one. So if you've got Steven Jackson rostered, he's already probably a backup plan. I don't think anybody is counting on him, even in dynasty leagues, as a top 2 or 3 option on their depth chart right now. Whatever you get at him this year, be happy with. Ride him as long as you can. But I think, if, I don't like to call players injury prone, but there's definitely players that have shown that they're higher risk for certain types of injuries than others, and Steven Jackson is one of them.
Okay, everybody out there, if you're not a Football Guy subscriber, become one, obviously. If you are, I hope you've read Gene's article, Hidden Value or Damaged Goods, When to Draft or Avoid Key Injured Players, that he also has updated. But I want to ask you about a more general point you make, Gene. A paragraph, I think a telling paragraph that begins, I'm not comfortable predicting the likelihood a specific player will suffer an injury. It suggests a belief that we can have some measure of certainty about the chances a player will suffer an injury within a given amount of time. Talk a little bit more about that idea that, we can say that there's some percent chance that a player will get hurt this year.
Yeah, you can say that there's a percentage chance that a player could get hurt this year, but it's an estimate. And if you ask what the range is from either side of that percentage, I'm not sure how to answer that question. I'm also not sure if you tell me a player has a 63% chance of injury this year, does it mean that's going to happen in week 1? Is it going to happen in week 10? And I think that's meaningful. Is it going to be an injury that it's a 1 or a 2 week injury? Is it going to be an injury that's a 6 to 7 week injury or longer? Is it a season-ending injury? It's hard to know. And if you're basing your percentage on a specific injury, yes, some of those, as we just talked about with Steven Jackson, you're worried about those from a week-to-week basis. But if you're basing your percentage on the percentage chance that Rob Gronkowski or Nate Burleson or somebody else is going to re-break an arm, that's hard to answer that question as well. So yes, I think if you asked an orthopedic surgeon, are some players more injury-prone than others, the answer you're going to get is yes. If you're going to ask those players, if you would sit in the medical staff rooms and say, what's the percentage chance that Rob Gronkowski is going to get hurt this year? You're going to get a lot of hedging. You're going to get a lot of eyebrows furrowed. You're going to get a lot of, we just don't know. And it's not that, the doctors or the players themselves, if you ask them this question, are trying to be deliberately misleading. It's just a very difficult question to ask. So yes, if somebody has had a history of injury, recency bias would tell you that they have a better chance of injury maybe this year. It's just something that you've seen recently. But compared to Marco Murray to Darren McFadden last year, those were two guys that we expected to get hurt last year. Darren McFadden didn't. He did get hurt, didn't finish anywhere near the top 20. DeMarco Murray was arguably pretty close to a top 5 back for an important part of your season. Adrian Peterson seemingly has an injury every year. Do we consider him injury prone? What does that mean for him? Do we knock players who are not elite athletes and then give Gronkowski and Peterson the benefit of the doubt? I think, again, we've had this injury prone discussion a lot. This is a little bit different way to look at it in terms of, are we going to assign a percentage or some sort of relative risk to them? Yes, you can do that, but just be aware how you're doing that. I think almost always, if you consider the reason you're doing it, it's because there's been a recent history of injury rather than a remote history of injury. Why is DeMarco Murray less injury prone this year than he was last year? Just because he had a healthy year last year? That doesn't make that much sense to me. So yes, football is a traumatic collision sport. Everybody is going to have a chance to get injured. What's the baseline risk? And is it everybody's baseline risk 30 to 40% and 60% is just a 20% or I guess 50% relative risk when you compare it to 35, 40%? It's just a really difficult question to answer. So you're not going to hear me say this player is that much more likely to have this particular injury or that particular injury as the season progresses. Know what the injury history is. No, like in Wes Welker's case, in Austin Colley's case, in certain defensive players' case, we know that by the way they play the game, they're putting themselves in harm's way in a different way than somebody else plays the game. So consider all of those variables into the mix there, but just be careful about ascribing an injury-prone label to a player without understanding exactly why you're doing it.
Gene, there's a new drug being manufactured in Philadelphia, and apparently the headline at Football Guys Newswire is "Coach High on Zach Ertz." So I'm wondering if you could give me the potential benefits and the potential side effects for being high on Zach Ertz, because it looks like tight end coach Ted Williams is getting high off Zach Ertz, and I'm wondering if also that would make the real Ted Williams, the one that we all know and love in Boston, rolling over in his grave right now.
Yeah, well, I think it would have been fun to be high on Julius Thomas or high on Jordan Cameron last year. So is it correct to be high on Zach Ertz? Is it correct to be high on Lardarius Green or Tyler Eifert or Dwayne Allen or your young tight end of choice at this point, maybe even an Eric Ebron, depending on what you think of him? There's definite side effects to that. It's not necessarily going to blow up your draft, but it's going to hurt your depth a little bit. You may have to replace them later, but it's one of those risk-reward equations, as so many things are, including getting high on Zach Ertz. If he does produce as Julius Thomas or Jordan Cameron did last year, you've got a strong lineup option. So just like any other drug you might get high on, it's personal preference, it's personal choice. Do what you like, and good luck with the result.
What's the
Spoken
saying,
like a
Bloom?
doctor.
If
Spoken
it
like a
feels
true
good
doctor.
to you, it's got to be good for you.
Yeah,
Is that
feels
right?
good to you. It's got to be good for you. But I just love that medical advice. I mean, that's great. And I think now we all can say that.
Do what you like.
Yeah.
I usually go the opposite. If it doesn't feel good, stop doing it.
Right. Yum and
That's
yuck. Tom
usually what
Robbins. The classic Tom Robbins. Yeah, go towards yum and away from yuck. It's really simple.
That's life. Go towards the light, ladies and gentlemen. By the way, I love Dr. Gene. I love you for many, many reasons. Yeah, putting that percentage on injuries for the season, it's like the guarantee on the box. And it says, it's okay, and if it's not, I'll make it all better, because they know they sold you a guaranteed piece of shit.
Side
So,
effects include.
there you go. He's Dr.
I would love to have okay. So I'm gonna tie a bow on this a little bit, because some people are gonna ask me, all right, you put percentages on, when you look at medical studies and you include them in your write-ups, you'll tell me that there's a 33% chance that a player with a hamstring injury may get injured in the first couple of weeks. Or we know that, depending on which study you read and which player population you're looking at, there's anywhere from a 4 to a 25% risk chance that a player with one ACL injury is going to tear that other ACL. Yes, those are percentages that we put on things, but I think it's just difficult to put that percentage chance on one particular player, because you're applying a population study to one specific event. And yes, it's applicable, but to stamp that percentage on there without a range, I think if we could do that would be awesome, and I think in time we may be able to narrow those things down a little bit more with some of the sports science and everything else. Hopefully we can. I don't know if we'll be able to or not, but it's not that I don't think it's something worth striving towards. I just think there's so many variables involved that no matter how you assign a value to each one of those variables in the algorithm, it's difficult to trust the one single percentage without a range of possibilities and without some sort of suggestion about when that percentage chance is most likely to happen. So yes, I'm likely to use some percentages in my writing, but I'm using them as background. I'm not ascribing them to one particular player's situation. It's important to know that yes, there's a good chance that a re-injury may happen in this situation versus what we said with Julio Jones and his foot injury, that I think that's a little bit less likely because of the medical studies we've seen. So don't take this discussion to mean that I don't think data is important, and that I don't think that you can ascribe data to some situations, and that I don't think that you can't put data on certain variables, recurrence rate, and that sort of stuff. We'll talk about this with concussions too. But I think when you boil all that down, everything in that soup to one number, and trust that that's the number, it's risky.
How's the draft going, Gene?
I think I'm up. I think Pasquino is probably going to come through the computer here soon and tap me on the back of the head and say, hey, where are your priorities, man?
Hey, JP, you'll be all right, man, okay?
Wow, this will be like Jeopardy music for Gene drafting. A couple of updates. Breaking updates. Derek Carr might be the first rookie quarterback to start out of the 2014 class. He's apparently tearing it up, and everyone's saying, hey, Matt Schaub's elbow is hurting, huh? Let's flare it up and then on the sidelines. And we've been watching this Isaiah Crowell story, and what's been curious to me is that he has barely played in the preseason. And you're thinking, do they really think if they don't play him, then no one's going to know about him? Everybody has the RSP. It's on the shelf of all 32 owners' bookshelves, you know? And they weren't playing him. And it was weird because they cut Edwin Baker, who was a decent running back and was a decent running back for them last year. They cut Edwin Baker when they went from 90 to 75 and not Crowell. And like, And they do play Crowell tonight, and he just busts off a 48-yard touchdown run. Now, I haven't seen the run and seen what it shows of him, but our man Ryan Burns, a Cleveland diehard, football sickness, says, I don't think Crowell's going to be anywhere but Cleveland, yo. So that's definitely something to watch, because Terrence West, meanwhile, had a fumble and didn't look good tonight. So just something to watch.
Something to monitor, as we also monitor. Bloom is a medical marvel, Dr. Gene, so before we let you go for now, I do have to have you comment on Bloom's tantric-like control because we're a half hour into the show and he hasn't said the name Cody Latimer.
I think that's because he got it all out in the 10 seconds before we went live.
He gets it all out in 10 seconds, people. He's Sigmund Bloom.
Nah, they don't call me the Minuteman for nothing.
Let's jump into some news and notes, fellas. Then we're going to do a little thing called Stand on the Table. Then I want some bold predictions. Then we'll do Twitter questions, and then we'll wrap it up and we'll head out for this evening. But I wanted to first start the discussion with Sean Hill, and we're going to pass this around between me, Matt, and Sig about the Rams quarterback situation. Now, years ago, Trent Green's leg was destroyed by Rodney Harrison. Hey, dirty players doing dirty things. Surprise, DJ Swearinger. And in comes Kurt Warner. Now, Sean Hill is no Kurt Warner. Okay, we know this. There's no Super Bowl coming for the Rams. Sorry, Rams. You have a great defense. You've got some offensive pieces, but this isn't Super Bowl 34 Redux. But Sean Hill, there's been a lot of people. It seems like disaster, and for Zach Stacy specifically, because if you're invested in the St. Louis passing game, it's with a later pick, okay? The Kenny Britt in the 12th round or whatever, and as we've often said, you can miss on your 12th. You can be okay. You're like Pasquino waiting for the pick. You can be all right, okay, if you miss on that 12th round pick. So if you're invested in the St. Louis passing game, it's likely with a much later pick. Not as much of a big deal for your team if you've already drafted before this Sam Bradford injury, but a lot of Zach Stacy owners really concerned. First, they were really nervous. First, fantasy owners and people in general, stop being so scared of everything. Stop being so nervous about everything. Zach Stacy and the Trey Mason thing, we know Trey Mason not pass protecting well. Stacy's going to be fine then. Then the Bradford injury happens, and everyone's like, ooh, we're worried about the stack in the box. Sean Hill's not terrible. You could make the argument easily that he's the best backup quarterback in the league. So with Zach Stacy specifically, Bloom first, Matt second, how much does this affect his fantasy value? Because I look at this as a big fan of Sean Hill, and I say, well, he can do what Bradford was going to do, and Zach Stacy's going to be fine for likely where you drafted him. Bloom, you're up.
Yeah, I would be worried about Zach Stacy for things that have nothing to do with Sean Hill. Honestly, Sean Hill is not going to be any less effective than Kellen Clemens. He'll be a lot more effective than Kellen Clemens. And Kellen Clemens being in, the funny thing is, in this weird roundabout way, Sam Bradford going down, because we're talking about Brian Schottenheimer here. And we saw that when Bradford went down last year, you almost feel like Jeff Fisher just tore the wheel away from him and said, I'm driving, we're going to run the ball a lot. And we're going to pressure with our defense. We're going to, we all remember that Monday night game, when they almost beat Seattle. Just a relentless, cruel kind of team physically on both sides of the ball. And so essentially that move should be good for Stacy or good for the running game. But I think that at some point you have to look at some of the smoke here coming out of multiple sources from St. Louis saying, hey, Benny Cunningham has been a better running back this summer. Benny Cunningham has looked better than Stacy. Now, he ran ahead of him in the third preseason game. That doesn't mean Benny Cunningham is the starter, but it's not meaningless. And Zach Stacy, as good as he was for our fantasy teams, at times last year, didn't just blow away everybody. It wasn't like Zach Stacy was like, oh, you can never get that guy off the field. And so Benny Cunningham is someone that I would be worried about. Notice I'm not talking about Trey Mason. And I want to say just as a larger point, because we've already brought up Terrence West. Jeremy Hill, we brought up playing a full game tonight in the fourth preseason game. Rookie running backs, Bishop Sankey is still a backup running back. Rookie running backs on the whole, Isaiah Crowe, I guess I said something positive about, but rookie running backs on the whole have had a rough summer. A few guys have enhanced their value. Carlos Hyde, because some of his competitors for touches behind Frank Gore got hurt, and Carlos Hyde's looked solid. But rookie running backs just don't look like good bets at all. And in this specific case, I think we've all had different nagging bad, just feelings about Zach Stacy where it's like, is it going to really carry over? And I don't feel it. I'm not feeling it right now. In the third round, there's no way I'm going near Zach Stacy. And if he's there in the fourth round, I'm still not sure I'm pulling the trigger.
Well, okay, let's take a look at this a little bit with Sean Hill and talk a little bit about Benny Cunningham too. With Sean Hill, I'll look at it this way. This was a guy that to me is not very far off from Ryan Fitzpatrick. Might actually be better than Ryan Fitzpatrick. It was just that there were teams that had him in demand as a backup, and rather than a guy who got cut and tossed around the league as, refuse, like a garbage barge that nobody wanted, and then somebody eventually needed a quarterback and he played well enough. So I think that when you look at Sean Hill, he was in greater demand than Ryan Fitzpatrick was, but it turned out that he never got a chance to start because there was such a there was such a low, there was such a demand for quarterbacks at a certain point, and he was kind of wrapped up there. So Sean Hill is more aggressive downfield. He's good in the pocket. He's a good leader. He has that kind of experience that you're looking for. Don't look at his stats right now because all of his stats are weighted towards throwing to Calvin Johnson, who can make plays in triple coverage. So you don't really want to use some of the stats that you're seeing to support it, what he does. Really, you're just going to want to look at some of the film and see that he is willing to be aggressive, that he's willing to be able to stand in and play tough, and that he shows some accuracy, and he's not a limp noodle kind of like Kellen Clemens, who's, I think this is the kind of guy that the Rams picked for a reason here when they tried to get a free agent as a quarterback, because I'm sure they were concerned about Sam Bradford's leg on some level or another. So, I think that that's something to consider. Kenny Britt, if he's playing well, as some people have talked about on the team, he's the type of guy that may not be able to win in coverage the way that Calvin Johnson can, but he's certainly good enough that Sean Hill can target him an awful lot, and it still makes him a decent late value. I would also look at the fact that Hill is also smart enough to be able to spread the ball around. He's going to throw a fair amount of interceptions because he can get too aggressive. That's something that's been a part of his game for a while, unless he's just wised up over the years sitting behind Matthew Stafford, who also likes to force the ball into coverage. So I don't think he's exactly learned anything from modeling from Matt Stafford. I would say that Benny Cunningham is an interesting guy to talk about and add something to. We need to remember at Middle Tennessee State, he looked pretty darn good. He never looked extremely fast, but he kind of looked like Steven Davis. Very powerful, enough burst that if you got him into the second level and gave him some steps, he was going to be a load to bring down. But I believe it was October or November of his senior year that he tore a patellar tendon. So think about the fact that Benny Cunningham was essentially the number 2 running back as an undrafted free agent for the Rams last year, barely a year returned from a patellar tendon tear. Ryan Williams hasn't been able to do that. Cadillac Williams did it twice, but his career was never the same. So if you're thinking about the Benny Cunningham that you saw last year, you might want to take a look at him this year to see if there's a difference, because there might be a difference in burst and speed and what they're seeing in camp now that he's a full year into the NFL and over a year, almost 2 years, almost 2 years removed from a major tendon injury.
And we move on in the news and notes portion of the Audible Live. Here it is, the footballguys.com podcast. Cecil Emmy, Sigmund Bloom, Matt Waldman. Gene's popping in and out somehow. Did Pasquino interrupt his internet connection? Does he have that power?
Maybe he had a deal that he couldn't refuse.
Ooh, don't even give people ideas out there, Cecil. You're gonna have to excise that out of the audio portion tomorrow, because we don't want denial of service attacks on people's fantasy drafts. Although I know some people who want to win their league bad enough that they're probably looking that up right now.
That's it. We'll clean that up in post. That's for sure. I'll also add in the live reads, Bloom. The live reads.
Oh, you want me to do the live reads? Because you said that.
Man.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Well, and the thing that everybody needs to know, okay, if you haven't heard about it yet, I know Outside the Lines, Darren Rovell just did a piece on Daily Fantasy. Daily Fantasy is the new cutting edge of fantasy sports 1 week. And also it tests some of the other legs of the table Matt Waldman talks about, the lineup setting. And the nice thing is that you have the entire league to choose from when you play Daily Fantasy Sports. And if you're saying, I'm interested, it's FanDuel. FanDuel is the place to start. FanDuel has so much going on right now. There's the first week Sunday million $25 entry. You can win $100,000. $1 million prize pool. There's also a $1.2 million Sunday Monster with a $120,000 first prize that you can win an entry via satellite, or you can just buy in directly for $200. And by the way, if you're saying, okay, what do I do? Hey, if you haven't signed up for FanDuel before, through Football Guys, you will get a 100% deposit bonus up to $200 whenever you sign up for FanDuel. And, they have an iPhone app now to track all of your FanDuel contests. So, just dip your toe in, check it out. It's definitely something that if it agrees with you, it'll really agree with you, and FanDuel will agree with you. So check it out.
Check it out, fanduel.com for more information. And daily strategy is something that I wanted to get to before we stand on the table. And I will literally stand on the table right here on this very show. But daily fantasy, a lot of people curious about strategy. Of course, that's why you check out footballguys.com, because we've got all different strategy angles. So let's pass this thing around, starting with me. When I play in the daily fantasy games, which are quite addictive, and you get to relive that feeling of the draft. We know the draft is the best part of the season. In most every single league, the draft is the greatest part. You got your trades and free agency, waiver wire, stuff like that. But every week you get to redo your squad, and you're not stuck with the season-long commitments. And that's why you check out FanDuel.com. Daily strategy for me, Bloom, and again, let's pass this thing around. Matt, let's start with you. Bloom, be second after that. Daily strategy or in the weekly games, like at FanDuel.com. For me, I look at the deeper positions where I'm going to find my bargains. And I like to grab a top quarterback. Of course, Peyton Manning, always a great quarterback to add there up at the top. And you're going to pay a hefty price, okay? So you're going to have to search for bargains elsewhere. But I try to find two elite guys, usually at a quarterback position and then a tight end position, your Jimmy Graham, what have you, then fill in, hopefully hit on one running back, and then fill in wide receiver with value picks. Now, Matt, in these daily games, like a FanDuel.com, is there any strategy that you look to first and foremost? Because there's multiple ways to attack this with your salaries and how much a cap that you have to spend to assemble your team. I'm always looking for value at wide receiver because it's deeper and it seems thicker with those better values. Is there any strategy, Matt, that you look to when playing the daily games?
Well, I'll be perfectly honest. I haven't really played much daily other than head-to-head fantasy. And so, I can talk about head-to-head fantasy and I'll touch upon some of the daily from what you're saying because it does still make a fair bit of sense. And I think Austin Lee has written a really nice article that Football Guys readers should check out when they're looking at certain types of stats that you should be looking at. And I think consistency is one of them that he's looking at, is trying to find ways to gauge maybe through film as well as stats that may be indicators to look at players who are more consistent and less up and down, so that you pick players who are going to be able to deliver for you. But from a head-to-head standpoint, I also always like to look at strategies for that, where you're just looking at really what's going on from a schedule standpoint. What are the matchups? It's just like what in terms of who, where are some of maybe the potential for being able to get some mismatches with those players on a certain defender or defenders, where the weak points are in the opposing defense, and being able to exploit that.
Okay, daily fantasy. What's funny is those of you who have been lurking in the fantasy internet for a long time might remember a site called pschallenge.com. And that's why I have, you've been to my house, you've seen my LaDainian Tomlinson signed mini helmet and the Edgerrin James one. That's where I won those. And this was a contest that it was very similar to FanDuel in that you had a salary cap and you picked players to fit under the salary cap each week. It was a season-long contest, though, not a weekly contest. But my experience in that, and I think the main thing you have to keep in mind is, and depending on the salary cap level you choose, and you may find a style, there's so many styles and permutations of these games. There's tournaments, there's 50-50 games where the top half of the people that enter cash out and the bottom half are losers. There's one-on-one matchups. There's a lot of different permutations of this, and one of the permutations is the salary cap. And if you prefer your skills of picking the good plays out of the bottom half of projections and rankings, then perhaps a contest with a leaner salary cap that forces you to make more of those choices is one that you would like. On the other hand, if you look, this happens to all of us during the season. You're like, man, I don't have this guy on my team, but wow, is he gonna like Colin Kaepernick week 1 or Frank Gore week 1 against Dallas, right? Like I know Frank Gore is gonna have 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. I know it. I didn't draft him anywhere, but man, I wish I could play him. And those kinds of contests where you can just say, I feel like out of all the good plays this week, I can isolate the best of the good plays, then a higher salary cap can work with you. So you try a lot of different things and see what suits your styles and strengths best. But no matter which format you pick, you're going to have a weakness somewhere. It's just like your draft strategy. You're going to have a weakness somewhere. And just like your draft strategy, I think the best places to leave your weaknesses are quarterback and wide receiver. I think those are the places where you can exploit matchups. I think those are the places where you can have a higher sense of certainty about a player having a wider range at the top of scoring by looking at the matchups. And quarterback in particular is the position where you can always steal points. You can always get cheap points at quarterback. So I think that those are the positions where you sacrifice, and you want to get 2 really good running backs you feel good about that week, and you want to get a really good tight end you feel good about that week. And David Dodds, by the way, for those of you, in case you don't know, and I didn't do a daily fantasy edition yet. Daily fantasy through the eyes of David Dodds will totally change how you look at it. He took 50,000 and turned it into 90,000, just experimenting. And I think, what did he tweet out this week? He put 40,000 in his FanDuel account for this year, and he's going to continue to tweet it out. It's 50%. I think it's 50% ds.blogspot.com. I believe that's it. I should look it up before I put that out there, and it's not correct. But so the point is that he's looking at things like entering Thursday night contests, because it's the same cast of characters as far as the high rollers, and you get to see what their lineups are for players on Sunday by just throwing some entries in contests that launch on Thursday, and then you know how to counteract what they're doing. So that's the kind of level of meta strategy that David Dodds is at. And it is 50, the word percent, ds.blogspot.com. I'm not sure if he's going to continue updating it. I'm sure that he'll give us something somewhere. He has a daily column at footballguys.com. But it's a whole different puzzle. This is one of the things I would say. I'm going to go off on a rant here for a second, because I always find it amusing that there is a faction in the fantasy community that is virulently anti-PPR. PPR makes me mad. I mean, it's all fantasy football. I mean, the whole thing is fantasy football, and they're all just these puzzles to solve. And you want to have a puzzle with, you have to start 3 tight ends. Cool. I'll just try to solve that puzzle. You want to have a puzzle with, a league that Gene and I are doing right now: 2 quarterbacks, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, 2 tight ends, 2 flexes, plus a full IDP lineup with some pretty jacked up IDP scoring that makes some IDPs as valuable. The IOP league that Matt and I and Gene do every year. They're all just puzzles to solve, and it's fun, right? The daily games are a new format of puzzles, and it again, it's not so much about the wins and losses as I think what we like about fantasy football is it's stimulating. It's continuously stimulating, and if you're looking for something new, of course, we recommend IDP fantasy football. We recommend Dynasty, Reality Sports Online with their cap and contract leagues, and it's beautiful, man. It's the golden age of fantasy football, and if this stuff turns you on, then the world is basically rising to meet your feet. Because as a customer, you want everybody competing for your eyes and your dollars, and that's what's happening right now.
No, I want my peanut butter jelly every day. Same way.
With no crust.
Exact same way every day.
Cut it diagonally.
Every meal, every hour.
If I don't cut it diagonally, my son gets mad.
Wow.
I was going to say, when you did that look, Bloom, you're like, PPR makes me so angry. I was like, huh.
Yeah.
That's what Bloom looked like as a petulant child.
Well, it's just funny to me because it's
cut my crusts.
Well, I mean, I'm going off on a tangent here, but when I see, but it doesn't match up to what's really valuable in football. Well, what fantasy football does? Yeah, I mean, every touchdown is not created equal. Every yard is not created equal. There's lots of yards and touchdowns. Garbage time points count the same as everything else. There's a lot of unfair things about fantasy football. Look, if you're looking for justice, fantasy football is not the place to look for it.
This ain't the Old West. Matt, are you in your pajamas?
No, man. Maybe I slept in this shirt, though. That might have been what it is.
All right,
I've been up late. I was up late studying tape last night and fell asleep on my couch.
Of
So
course.
so that was what it was. So
Of course. By the way, we have to talk a little South Carolina. Oh my God, Mike Davis, come on, baby, come on,
Not Kenny
Gamecocks.
Hill? You're not going to talk Kenny Hill?
No, not Kenny
Look
Hill.
at Matt Waldman trading a third-round pick for Jonathan Stewart in a dynasty league.
it was offered to me while we were talking. I'm like, I started looking around, going, "Did he get hurt again?" And I thought, well, no. So, all right, why not? I'll just take it.
All right, well, let's start standing on the table, and to do that, I will literally stand on the table. Oh, Captain, my Captain. These are players that you're leaving your draft with, as I fidget and make sure to suck in my gut. You're leaving your draft. You're standing on the table with these players, and Bloom gets to show his, what was it, sapsuckers? What?
Super Suckers. This shirt belonged to Jeff Wilson.
Oh, there we go.
And to keep with theme, the name of the album must have been High.
There you go. Okay, so enough of that, and we'll see Matt's pajamas in a little bit. But standing on the table, one guy that you're leaving every draft with, and I've called my shot. I've told Frank Schwab.
Frank Schwab?
I've told everybody in every single draft that I do, you are not leaving this draft with Devontae Freeman, because I am. Because I am standing on the table for Devontae Freeman. And again, where you can get him, current average draft position, that last check was what, in the 9th round? Devontae Freeman, 903, running back 40. So where you get him and how much value he could have on that Falcons team when Steven Jackson, not if, when he's done, because he's almost done. And there's nothing left in the tank. When I'm going through and I get phone calls and people are, rate my draft, and I got this guy, and I didn't do what you said, but I got Steven Jackson. Oh, it's a kick to the nuts. It's like, why are you wasting that pick on Steven Jackson when you can get Devontae Freeman and you can get him later, and he's the player that you want. He's the player that reminds me of a young Maurice Jones-Drew. He's all hair and ass. I love the way that he can change direction. You see, it's a 4th preseason game, but you see tonight, touchdown, at about 40 yards rushing and 45 yards receiving. So there's 90 yards and a touchdown pretty much in a 4th preseason game. But it gives you an idea of how this guy can be used. I look at that offense. I look at the lack of weapons in the passing game outside of Roddy and Julio and a dash of Harry Douglas. They don't have a tight end. They also have offensive line woes. They also have defensive woes out the wazoo. If Atlanta wants to stay in it, they're going to have to pass, keep the foot on the gas. That's not slowing the game down and putting in Steven Jackson. That's not slowing things down and even going with Quiz Rogers, which, honestly, we had some thoughts of what he might be. He's not even a poor man's version of Darren Sproles. Devontae Freeman is the answer for this team, and in every draft, the player I am standing on the table for is Devontae Freeman as a 9th-round pick. Some people are getting him later than that, by the way. 10th-round pick, beautiful pick right there for Freeman because he can do it all, and on a team that's going to need weapons. Matt Ryan, you think about a pass rush getting to Matt Ryan, it's not always going to be there to develop deep with Julio. It's not always going to be there with Roddy as they try to press man on the outside. Dump off to Freeman. Let him do his thing. Let him go between the tackles. He's, not a pile pusher by any stretch of the imagination, but he's willing to run between the tackles. He's capable of getting to the edge, but he doesn't take it to the corner store. Matt Waldman saying doesn't take it to the corner store, automatically, which is what you like to see from a young runner. So while we were talking about rookie backs at the beginning of the show, Bloom, I'm taking a rookie back that I'm standing on the table for, and where I'm getting him and what I'm having to pay for him, I love the value, I love the price, I love that spot, and I love the potential payoff with Devontae Freeman. Sigmund Bloom, what player are you standing on the table for?
Yeah, well, can I ask you a question about Devontae Freeman?
Sure.
Well, and I just want to say as an aside, I'm still curious what happens with Antone Smith in that backfield. Because
he's always been kicking around. We saw him at the Senior Bowl, Bloom. He was at Mobile down there.
Yeah. And just, anytime a guy has, 145 yards on 5 carries.
But he does that every year.
I hear you. But when Jackson was out, they were using Rodgers and Smith and then Freeman. This is what I want to ask you, since you're going to be drafting him in all these leagues. It's a serious question. If Steven Jackson stays healthy for the first 4 weeks or 6 weeks or something, or how? Like, when would you consider throwing Freeman back, or is he a guy that you're riding like until week 16? He's gonna be on your roster no matter what is happening in the Atlanta backfield.
Yeah, I'll go up to the fantasy playoffs with Devontae Freeman there. And if it comes around, let's say Steven Jackson plays the entire flipping season, when it comes around, and maybe there's waiver wires that close. I mean, we do the waiver wire show, and then that 1 year we stopped, if you're like, we still got waivers going. So, there are some leagues that I'm in where waivers are going to stop before the fantasy playoffs. If it's looking like Jackson's still in there, then yeah, at that time I'll say, okay, Freeman, you'll be there if I need you in case of emergency or what have you, but I've got patience. And that's what I'm preaching with everyone when I recommend Devontae Freeman as that 10th round pick, 9th round pick, what have you. It's always patience. Be patient, because they're going to try to feed Steven Jackson. It's not going to work, and Freeman's got the ability to work well as both a runner and receiver out of the backfield.
Yeah, and that's almost exactly what I would say about, as far as the bottom line advice about my guy, and this is no surprise, and maybe I'll add a second one in, but it is Cody Latimer, and the more I dwell on it, the more I think about it, the more I ponder it and stare into the abyss, the more compelled I am to make sure that you have Cody Latimer on your team. And I've talked about this a lot. I don't want to belabor it, but for some of you that are late to the party here, first of all, Cody Latimer is a tremendous talent, and his tremendous talent is translating. It's showing up on the field, and the indicators of that are what all the beat writers are doing. Did you see, by the way, Cease, did you see when Leggy replied to me when I called out Latimer? Like,
I saw something about that. What's Leggy up to, man?
Well, you can piggyback off of this because I said, I probably 2 or 3 times this week already, because it's draft season, and I feel like I want to emphasize this point. This is why some people are like, geez, Bloom's going on about Latimer again. But I was saying, you must get Cody Latimer, because we can get this down to very simple fantasy algebra, okay? The denominator is the Denver passing game, which is the most productive passing game in the league, and the numerator is Cody Latimer's talent. Now, unlike somebody like Julius Thomas, where we knew going into last season that Julius Thomas was going to have an opportunity with the first team, yet there were still people saying, well, where's the targets going to come from? How's he going to, all these mouths to feed, how's it going to work out? Well, you saw how it worked out. With Latimer, it's the targets plus that he doesn't have this direct path to the field that Thomas had. But, that's where the patience comes in, because you wait and see if this explosive talent comes together with this Hall of Fame quarterback in the offense that is putting his numbers at a level that he's never reached before. I mean, don't you want to see what happens with him on your roster and not on the waiver wire or not on someone else's roster? I think this one's pretty elementary, and you can't say, well, okay, nobody in my league knows about Latimer, so I don't need to draft him, because I saw somebody say, they told me that they got Latimer in the 23rd round of a startup dynasty. I mean, I felt like that was an atrocity. I mean, my eyes almost just rolled out of my head. But anyway, the point is this, that you might say, hey, nobody in my league knows about Cody Latimer, so I'm not going to draft him. But the Broncos have had, and I think wasn't it Leggy who said something like 20, he may have 25 catches and 7 for touchdowns. Isn't that right?
Yeah, Cliff said that.
I'm sorry, Cliff said that.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're going to use him in the red zone. They may use him in the red zone first game against Indy. And your chance to keep him under the radar could go away, because everyone's going to be watching that game, and he just has to make one play that's the kind of plays he's been making. It's the Sunday night game. Everyone's going to see it. All he has to do is make one play that is the kind of plays that Cecil's been seeing him make every day in practice, and everyone's going to know about him, and you're going to have competition on the waiver wire. The Leggy thing I'll add in real quickly is, I was standing on the table, Twitter version, about Cody Latimer, and Jeff Legwald just jumped right in, was like, yes, and that doesn't happen with beat writers, especially not Jeff Legwald. And it's funny because we had a little exchange after that. Like, I remember talking to you about Brandon Marshall back when we were mystified by how he fell to the 4th round. Separate conversation. But it's when a beat writer jumps in unsolicited to say yes, that's an indicator. I mean, and I think it's been pretty unanimous that any observer in Denver that has seen Latimer has just been. I mean, I'm seeing people say things like they can't keep him off the field for long. They just can't.
Yeah, and I'm being seen things like Bubba Caldwell. Listen, Bubba's fine. He can play XZ or slot, and he can fill in for anybody. The plan is to have Latimer at X next year, to have Emmanuel back in the slot. It's only the second year he's played outside the slot. This year, they're moving Emmanuel around as the number 2 target in that offense. You heard me right. The number 2 target in the offense is Emmanuel Sanders. Demarius is still number 1. And by the way, Demarius is always 2. May I go off on a rant, please, as we're going to talk Broncos. Demarius is number 2. Calvin Johnson has the ability to go 115, 120 catches, 2,000 yards, and 15 touchdowns. Demarius is always going to be 90 to 95 catches, always about 1,400 yards, and always about 10 to 15. That's awesome, but that's still number 2. Okay, so for anyone out there, and I've got the questions, well, why would you take that? Why isn't Demaryius Thomas number 1? The loss of Eric Decker is going to lead to more. No, it's not. The loss of Eric Decker is going to lead to more Julius, and it's going to lead to more Cody. Because when Welker comes off the field, and they've been using a less is more approach with Welker, and obviously you see how much you can get out, they're going to limit what Welker does, get him through this year, maybe save him for the playoffs, and supplement in. Welker goes off, Latimer comes on. Period. Not Bubba. Latimer comes on. So I had to get the laser beams out there. Pew, 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 pew. That horse is evil, by the way.
It is the demon horse.
Yeah, it is, and it killed its
its creator, all good demon creations.
Okay, Matt, your turn to stand on the table with your jammies. Do you have footies on too?
Nah, dude. Look, man. He's just a shirt. So here we go.
Oh, that was a cock shot, Matt. I said stand on the table, not show your junk.
Listen, we can sit here and talk about late round picks, and those are some really good late round and mid round picks. But let's up the ante here a little bit. Okay. Let's go hit with the gift that keeps on giving. He was a late round pick 2 years ago. He was a mid to late round pick last year. He won the Super Bowl last year. He's Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson right now, his ADP has been pretty much around 100 for, I don't know, most of the preseason. Everyone's like, well, he's on a run-heavy team. No, he's on a team that runs the ball very well and runs the ball very efficiently. And yes, they have some decent volume, and Russell Wilson hasn't had a lot of, 300-yard games. I know that Matt Berry has him on his hate list, and that's all fine and well. Everyone has a different opinion about who they love and who they hate. But I'll just put it this way. Russell Wilson is poised to take that next leap to be within your top 5 to 7 fantasy quarterbacks. He goes on streaks like this because he scores touchdowns. He scores long touchdowns. He's a terrific thrower of the football. He has a healthy Percy Harvin this year. He was somebody that if you looked at maybe an extra 25 yards per week out of its wide receiving core from last year's stats, he would have been a 4,000-yard passer. You're looking at a team that is geared towards making the passing game a bigger part of the offense because Marshawn Lynch isn't going to be there anymore. And I'm sorry, folks, we all love Christine Michael, and some of us like Robert Turbin, but they are not Marshawn Lynch. They will never be Marshawn Lynch. Marshawn Lynch is probably the most underrated special back that we've had in the past 10 years. And I think that you just need to take a look at what he's done in playoff games. He may not break off the pretty runs that LaShawn McCoy and Jamal Charles do, or that Adrian Peterson does, but Lynch is probably one of the best yards after contact runners that we've had in quite a long time, and he's a versatile player. They have a good offensive line in Seattle. They have a strong defense, but that defense is not going to be as strong personnel-wise in terms of established players in that system within the next 2 to 3 years when those contracts expire. Because who do you think they're going to get rid of? These defensive players or Russell Wilson? They're not going to get rid of Russell Wilson. They're going to try and add to that team, and that's what they've done with guys like Paul Richardson and Kevin Norwood, and what they tried to do with Percy Harvin last year before he got hurt. If you look at what Wilson has done in the preseason, I know it's just preseason, folks, but it's just a continuation of what he's looked like down the stretch of the past 2 seasons that he's played in the NFL. This is a guy that's getting smarter. He continues to work hard. And look at the guys that you're going to be picking ahead of him if you're following ADP. Cam Newton with Kelvin Benjamin, a rookie Kelvin Benjamin who looks pretty good, and a bunch of guys who would probably qualify on paper as worse than the Seattle receiving core that looks quote-unquote bad on paper. Robert Griffin and his knee and his maybe some of his mental worries about that knee, and probably being a year behind his development after what Shanahan dysfunctionally did to him. Then Matt Ryan and his offensive line with Jake Matthews, who's probably a year away from really grasping what he needs to do. Watching him last week, you know, he wasn't bad for his first time at left tackle in the pros, but let's just put it this way. Lamar Holmes on the opposite side at right tackle, he gets beaten like a drum on a regular basis, and while he didn't do bad last week, this team is not all that great. And then you have Tom Brady, arguably, I can see where maybe you would look at him if Gronkowski stays healthy, and they do have a decent replacement at guard for Logan Mankins, who Brady looked like he was about to have, or sounds like he was about to have a conniption fit about the fact that they traded Mankins, and then you have Nick Foles. So to me, there's, you know, when I look at some of these. Look at some of these players who are getting drafted before Brady or before Russell Wilson in many of these cases, I think it's kind of ridiculous. I mean, I look at the efficiency of what we're going to have going on here, and you're getting value at really in somewhere between round 7 to 10, 7 to 11, depending on where you want to pull the trigger on a quarterback, and you can get a second quarterback and play committee in case it doesn't work out, and still have been able to, you know, not pick a quarterback early, but most likely end up with 2 guys who are going to give you elite games depending on the matchup. And to me, I think that Wilson's going to end up being that guy who can be in that top 4 to 6 quarterbacks in this particular season. So to me, I haven't left a draft without Russell Wilson, and then, you know, put Jay Cutler or Phillip Rivers, you know, on the end of that. And I think that I'm ready to go to town, and I can pick up some of my late guys like Kelsey and Paul Richardson, and, you know, I don't have to stand on the table for them. I can just go ahead and prop them up on a stool.
Is playing committee like playing doctor, Matt?
Is playing committee like playing doctor? I don't know. We got to ask Gene, because he's the one with all that hair.
Nothing is like playing doctor.
Get that drop.
It's only weird if you make it weird.
And we saw Matt Waldman's junk, and we're moving on to bold predictions, not bold crotch shots. That's what I meant to say. And I was talking about the Gamecocks. Remember Mike Davis conversation? Yeah, that's it. Joe, sorry. Bold predictions this year, fellas, before we get to the Twitter questions and Dr. Gene Bramall. And listen, there could be plenty of bold predictions, all right? And I say this not as a warning to the listeners, but just know that there's a lot of bold predictions that don't mean anything. And I know we got a request from our guy on Twitter, hey, do some bold predictions. That's fine. Bold but sane predictions, I guess, is the way that I would put it, because you can predict anything and not have it come true and be like, well, that's why it was bold, because it was so out there that Brock Osweiler would lead the league in passing yardage. And by the way, Bloom, people want to hear us argue about Brock. We'll do that on a different show. I don't know when, honestly. We'll find some time eventually, but we did a nice 20-minute bit on Cody Latimer. So bold predictions this year, and it kind of ties in with my stand on the table, guys. Bold prediction for me, and it does not come with a great price, honestly. Looking at average draft position, and I talked about Devontae Freeman standing on the table, another player that I'm excited about this year with the New England Patriots is James White. So my bold prediction is James White leads the team in rushing. When you have Mike Reese not putting Stephen Ridley on his 53-man roster, when you have Shane Vereen, who's a guy that can easily get banged up and is really, he's a speed back, an explosive guy, not the player you're going to feed the rock to in terms of between the tackles. White, while he's not a pile pusher, He's a guy that's an efficient runner. He doesn't waste a lot of motion. And I'm thinking about Melvin Gordon as well in that Wisconsin LSU game coming up Saturday. But I look at James White and what he can do, which is everything. I look at the fact that this is a team that knows how to run the ball. The Mankins trade notwithstanding, but they know how to run the ball. They'll emphasize running the ball. And they're, with the right addition, I know there was a lot of people saying, they've got their Hernandez. Well, they're not committed to any sort of offensive form or set. If it's one tight end or two tight ends or four wide or whatever, they can morph. Belichick is very chameleon-like in what he can do. But the one constant in what the Patriots do, regardless of, if it's 12 personnel or 22 personnel or whatever, they run the ball. And James White, with that ability as an efficient runner, enough speed, enough quickness, not overly fast, not overly powerful, good receiver out of the backfield, and obviously Tom Brady likes him a lot as well. The concerns with Ridley and the fumbling, the concerns with Shane Vereen and his durability. My bold prediction for this year is James White leads the team, leads the Patriots in rushing. So, Bloom, I've set the example. I would like for our guy, Anthony, who wanted our bold predictions, a bold prediction for you, Mr. Bloom.
Sure, I'll go with one that folds into some things we've talked about earlier tonight. I will say that the leading rusher for the Cleveland Browns will not be Ben Tate or Terrence West.
Ooh.
And it comes down to a couple of things. I mean, first of all, it's just Tate's durability over the years. I think that Terrence West hasn't really done anything yet to push Tate or honestly make it clear that he's automatically the guy if and when Tate goes down, and you have two very talented running backs. And we'll see if Obi can make it, if Silent G can make it with his special teams play. But you have two very talented running backs between Lewis and Crowell that I think, honestly, and I think about Dion Lewis and what I saw of him at Pitt in a Kyle Shanahan running game. I like it. I like it a lot. I think of Isaiah Crowell's talent, and I think that this is not a controversial view on this show, that Isaiah Crowell is a more talented running back than Terrence West. Just because one went in the third round and one went undrafted does not mean that the third rounder is more talented than the undrafted guy. Okay, all Isaiah Crowell has to do is survive the cuts and make the roster. So I think that at this point, if you're looking for that Cleveland Browns back because you're saying I'm just not feeling it with Ben Tate, I don't think Terrence West is going to be that answer.
Boldness from Matt Waldman next.
Go to my tiers. That's boldness every week. But let's go ahead and pick somebody from those tiers. And we'll go to the very top of those tiers. And that's who I think is going to be a top 12 back in fantasy football this year. And that's going to be Rashad Jennings on a poor New York Giants offense. They've looked like, warmed over dog turd. But let's look. I mean, we got to be honest. They do. And I don't think that Rashad Jennings is probably even going to average 4 yards a carry. But it doesn't matter. If he even averages just near 4 yards a carry with the number of touches he's going to get, because they don't have anybody else. I know people think they've got Andre Williams. And let me just tell you, Andre Williams, maybe I'm wrong, and it won't be the last time that I will be wrong. But yes, Andre Williams is kind of doing the robot like Cecil Lammy's doing right now. He looks very impressive, like the big bad Mongo running down in the open field. But the problem is that you need to get him into the open field for him to look that impressive. And I just don't see it with him. I haven't seen it in the preseason thus far. So I look at Jennings. He can catch the ball. He's good between the tackles. He can break tackles. He has that good first step. He has the ability to make the first man miss. He's a savvy football player, and he has looked good in the preseason despite the Giants' offensive line, despite Eli Manning, and the fact that Eli Manning is going to have to check down 100 to Rashad Jennings on a regular basis. And I think by basically sheer volume with this team and playing behind and giving them the dink and dunk and the little plays, because they're going to be playing from behind so often, that Rashad Jennings is going to be your reliable garbage man this year, and he is going to ended up being a top 12 back.
Can I barge in here for a second? I just want to put a couple little dollops of whipped cream on there. Okay. One thing I think that's interesting is if your draft's already over, or if you're just going a different direction than Rashad Jennings. No, this is going to be good. One is that the Giants, and I'm starting to look at, can you guys tell I spent a lot of time staring at the Week 1 schedule today? You look, and on Monday night, that early Monday night game is the Giants going to the Lions. And I think that Ziggy Ansah, full go for game 1?
Yeah, should be. There may be a little bit of rotation there, but he looks healthy and ready to go.
So when Ansah was playing last year, that Lions defensive line really came to life. And you can remember last year there were some games, as the year went on especially, there were games when you just did not start your running backs against the Lions. You guys remember that? I mean, it wasn't that long ago. There were games that woe is you if you expected anything from your running backs against the Lions. I mean, we can look at last year and see games like, speaking of the Giants, Andre Brown had 16 carries for 40 yards against them. I mean, sure, LaShawn McCoy tore him up. Eddie Lacy had 10 carries for 16 yards. Remember, the Bobby Rainey Express had 18 carries for 35 yards. Le'Veon Bell had 18 carries for 36 yards. Matt Forte, 17 carries for 33 yards. You get in the picture here, okay? This was all in the second half of the year. So I think that Jennings, on a national stage, well, the whole Giants offense on a national stage is probably going to come out, and speaking of warmed-over dog turds, that's what you're going to see on a national stage. And I think that Rashad Jennings could be one of the very best buy low opportunities in Week 2. And going back to the robot, to Andre Williams, Mike Tanier, a tremendous football writer on many levels, when he wrote about the Giants situation, he said, hey, Tom Coughlin, don't be surprised if, sure, Andre Williams, goal line, black blow. Tom Coughlin's the kind of guy that wants the ball in the veteran's hands at the goal line. So that's far from a given that Rashad Jennings won't get the touchdowns in this offense.
Let's put a cherry on top of this.
Nice.
And,
the
and
dollops?
we'll make it.
The dollops?
Yeah, I know.
Are you milking a cow? Or
No, it's the pastry horn. It's that little pastry horn. The icing. I'm decorating the
Yeah,
cake.
it's the.
I was
That's
thinking
what
of something else there. But
Yeah, he was, but
Well, of
but
course
let's
you
put
are.
let's put an IDP cherry on this with the Detroit Lions defense and talk about Tahir Whitehead, because this is Matt Waldman's theory of guys who you hold on to for 2-3 years and do nothing, and then you can't keep them anymore, Justin Tuck, and then they end up exploding. Tahir Whitehead had 10 tackles in his preseason effort last week, looked mighty fine, was known as a very good tackler, very athletic, good off the edge, especially as a pass rusher. They're putting him in that Sam position for Detroit. I wouldn't be surprised if he is a sleeper this year for IDP leagues that you can pick off the waiver wire, and you can thank me later as somebody if you're in a sack-heavy league.
so you had to get rid of Justin Tuck, Matt?
Early on in my fantasy career, I had to get rid of Justin Tuck in a league, and I've always lamented that because he was one of my favorite finds. Had him as a rookie, and knew what I saw, and knew it was going to be good, but just couldn't keep him with what I had going on my roster.
And after he had to let Justin Tuck go, he was sadder than Richard Simmons attempting to throw a football. We'll move on to Twitter questions with Dr. Gene Bramwell. What was that look for, Gene? That was good. That was good, right? I mean, my other one I was going to use was Sigmund Bloom loves to beat up on the competition like a drill sergeant on a tubby recruit with a sexually ambiguous name.
Pat?
No? Nothing? Crickets? Really? Crickets?
Kubrick. I'm thinking about Full Metal Jacket. Full Metal Jacket? I can't tell.
That didn't end well for the sergeant.
No. So we'll scratch that from the record.
Spoiler alert.
Gene, yeah, exactly. Gene, you're used to asking questions. Now it's your turn to fire away with some of our Twitter questions. # Audible Live on Twitter.
Okay, so I think this is, we still got 1 weekend left of drafts left, so let's do a couple of draft strategy questions. And I'm going to start with you, Bloom. At Steve Ga, G-A-A, I'm assuming that's Ga, wants to know, how would your early draft strategy change in non-PPR leagues? Are you still looking at Jimmy Graham in the middle of that round? Are you still pushing, at the turn there? Are we looking at A.J. Green? Are we looking at Des Bryant? Are we looking at Julio Jones? Or do those guys fall back a little bit?
Yeah, I think that it really doesn't change that much, but only because I was going stud tight end and running back early in PPR leagues too. I think the depth at wide receiver remains, but the gradations get even smaller because you're taking away the per week and over the season haul difference between 60 and 80 catches or 4 catches and 6 catches, and then that shrinks those gaps. It also shrinks the gaps at tight end, but you had a pretty massive gap at tight end to begin with. I don't remember exactly the number off the top of my head, but Rob Gronkowski and Jimmy Graham are the kinds of guys, and Julius Thomas too. They're basically going to score a touchdown a game. And in fantasy football, I don't even care what position you play outside of quarterback. That's fantastic. That's massive. But at tight end, where you can sometimes in non-PPR leagues, the difference is those safe PPR plays like Jordan Reed or Dennis Pitta or Heath Miller. Or Heath Miller could have a great touchdown total this year too. But those safer PPR plays, all of a sudden, if Jordan Reed has 6 for 44 instead of 10, that's 4. And Rob Gronkowski getting that touchdown, or Jimmy Graham getting that touchdown, or Julius Thomas getting that touchdown stays that much farther ahead of the pack. So I think tight end and running back, it still comes back to that same idea. I get the guys who I know can ball out at the toughest positions to find guys that can do that. And PPR, non-PPR, actually gives you even more incentive. And honestly, I think it may give you a little more incentive to go for that Peyton Manning or Aaron Rodgers or Drew Brees. A little bit more. I might tweak that. I might bump them up, that trigger point of where you take them, a little bit higher than on PPR, simply because I'm pushing wide receivers down my board.
All right, so I'm going to keep the strategy stuff going. Matt, Mo Jassa at Mo Jassa has a question about your upside down strategy. Wants to know if there's any difficulty implementing that. What are the challenges to implementing upside down strategy in an auction? Are you just changing the money allocation a little bit? Are you changing how you nominate players, when you nominate players, how you're looking at your value plays later in the auction? How does it change?
It changes in the sense that I don't really even consider doing an upside down strategy in an auction league. I don't really call it an upside down. I don't even have one for that, and I'll tell you guys why. I mean, I get that question asked a lot, which is, can you do one for an auction league? Well, the upside down strategy is based on the predictability of snake drafts. Of serpentine drafts. That's really why that comes into play. So when you change the fact that you're going from this predictable order of knowing when players are going to go off the board and ADP, and you change it to basically, we'll see, we don't know who, when, and what's going to be nominated and how much money that's going to go for and what the value is, you just throw out upside down out the window. Now, you can take some of the elements of it and say, look, I want to go wide receiver heavy because I think that that's where the most value is to be able to get, the best bang for my buck. If you think that the non-running back positions are the best ones to go after, then you do that. But really, then you start looking at how does that strategy come into play, and it really comes into more just good old-fashioned fundamental auction takes that you want to have. Some of that is, where do you value your players? I mean, do you feel like that is there strong depth at that position? Do you feel like that you are going to be able to acquire enough players with your budget that you can mix and match with your lineup and do fairly well? Or do you want to go studs and duds and basically go with, a look where you're going to go with high-end guys and then hope for the best in the late rounds? I personally, if you're going to ask what my strategy would be for that, I like to go studs and duds in most of my auctions because there's the waiver wire there. So why not go for greatness that's going to play 16 weeks and be consistently high scoring? And then if I need to pick up some guys off the waiver wire, well, I'm not afraid of doing that if I had to get some also rans at my positions later on because I blew a lot of my money early.
Good. So I'm going to ask you to put your Steelers homer hat on for a second.
Okay. Do you want me to do my Steelers trivia? I have this calendar next to me every day. Bloom, this one's for you. The playoff balanced Steelers allowed only 80 points in their 8 regular season games at Heinz Field in 2011. That's not a question. That's a statement. What former Chargers draft pick posted a pair of 1,300-yard receiving seasons, including a club record 1,398 and 1997 for the Steelers in the 90s? What former Chargers draft pick posted a pair? Sounds like Porky Pig trying to read Shakespeare.
Is it Yancey Thigpen?
You got it. There you go. There's the Yinzer right there. I'm an adopted Yinzer. Bloom's born into that, man.
Yeah, you can't
Well
get that
done.
stuff off.
Yancey Thigpen. I don't know if I'd have come up with that one. Well done. All right, so I was trying to get away from the Denver question here, but here I went and picked a Twitter handle that said @DenJr10. So somehow we're going to get Denver in here anyway. But DenJr10 wants to know, what's Marcus Wheaton's upside in a redraft this year?
Marcus Wheaton's upside in a redraft is very high because we've been talking about it without actually talking about it. Ben Roethlisberger running the no huddle. Ben Roethlisberger running the no huddle is going to make things a lot smoother for this offense because he gets to do what he wants to do. This means more for Antonio Brown, his go-to guy. This means more for Heath Miller, a definite one of those veteran sleepers that people are forgetting about. But with Marcus Wheaton having the developed route running ability, and we know Lance Moore is going to cut in a little bit to that as well. We'll see what Martavis Bryant does. But if we put the number at about 65 catches, 800 yards, let's say 5 touchdowns total in that offense, that's about where I like Marcus Wheaton this year. And there's a lot to like with this kid, with the ball tracking ability and with that route running. He knows how to set up defenders. He does little things that most second-year wide receivers and certainly rookie wide receivers struggle with in terms of counting steps, knowing how to use not only his head but his shoulders to fake out which direction he's going to go. So he'll get open. We know that with a no huddle, the pace will be accelerated for the Steelers offense, and that guy that's out there breaking off cornerbacks, breaking off multiple routes, he can run the entire route tree. I like Marcus Wheaton. I'm not going crazy for him this year in terms of 1,000 yards receiving and 7 touchdowns, but if we put the number about 65 catches, 800 and some yards, 5 touchdowns, that sounds about right for Wheaton this year.
Have you noticed that Sigmund's got the same shirt on that he has in his little logo picture?
Oh yeah, when we were in New Zealand.
Yeah. It's the
Yeah,
same
that's
shirt.
that picture. That picture was from I can't remember the name of the beach in New Zealand. New Zealand's just ripe with beaches, but it's a Jeff Wilson shirt, man. I was after Jeff passed, his widow gave me some choice shirts from the collection, and see, it's 10:40. I can say, whenever I've been at a concert and dancing and it's warm and stuff. You guys know how shirts kind of absorb your scent. It's nice. It's comforting.
What are you going to wear to fish?
I don't know. I was actually trying to figure out which Wilson shirt I was going to bring because we've got a Jeff Wilson classic from the Ween at Stubbs show in '99. The classic, the legendary, notorious, infamous show. If you were there, I won't say anything more than that. Look it up in Austin. There's that one. There's the Clockwork Orange shirt. You know what I've got? See, while we're on, because I have no fashion sense and no style whatsoever. I have a lot of shirts from my grandfather. Some nice shirts from the '60s. They actually have some kind of far out stitching patterns, but they're just the shirts that are thin cotton shirts, like old Van Heusen shirts. Those are good because we need to have that ventilation.
Mm-hmm.
So I got to pack tomorrow morning, but you got me thinking about this. This is good. You guys are like my wife or something. It's like I'm thinking about this. My wife asked me earlier, "You gonna pack tonight?" Like I pack right before I got out the door, but maybe there'll be some foresight this time.
Can you cultivate Cecil's hustle and flow hairstyle from tonight?
No, I don't even try. When Cecil and I and our destinies became intertwined, I knew that from a style standpoint, I shouldn't even try to keep up with Cecil. That being said, if you look out there on the footballguystv.com channel on YouTube, you can find our Football Guys videos that we did. Was it 2 summers ago, Cease?
Yes.
That Cease was the wardrobe guy. So it was the T-shirts, the blazers, much more than I would have come up with on my own. I would have had more super suckers. And by the way, on the subject of the must have been high, where is it? Must have been high. The whole stand on the table, Cease, the stand on the table segment. By week 4, it becomes the must have been high segment.
And speaking of must have been high, perhaps Bloom, when he's washing fish, may become so inebriated with joy that he's harder to understand than Jar Jar Binks on Novocaine. These are the jokes, people. These are the jokes.
So you didn't give us a chance to laugh, so that made it funny.
Okay. Good. Dr. Gene Bramall, thanks for everything you do, buddy. It's always great. And when Johnny Love messes up an interview, just a behind-the-scenes note, We had Dr. Gene on to talk about Welker's concussion. Johnny Love messed up the audio. I seriously thought he was going to cry because we were going to replay it on Monday and play it off as live. And, well, I just had to call you back, Gene. So thanks for doing that, buddy.
That's okay. I didn't know that's what it was. I just figured there was more stuff you wanted to ask, and then I noticed you were asking me the same questions.
Yeah, and then Johnny went to pick up the phone when you were done with the interview on Monday, and you had already hung up, so he was all sad.
Oh, that's fine, man.
Because he wanted
I think
to
I spent longer talking to him on Sunday than I did talking to you.
There we go. Dr. Gene, of course, you can follow on Twitter at Gene Bramall. Check out Bramall's Second Opinion at footballguys.com. He's Matt Waldman, and he's wearing jeans tonight, but he's got nice legs.
Thank you, and I got my Michael Shoddy pose here. Hey, Mike. I love my football, too, though.
There you go. What kind of football is that, by the way? I was looking at the stitching. I was like,
It's my brother's from us playing catch, and then he just left it here. So, I guess a Harvard-educated PhD guy doesn't really need a football. So, well, unless we should talk to Ryan Fitzpatrick about that too. But my brother doesn't have the lawn gnome thing yet, so we'll see if he can get that cultivated.
Yeah, those stitches are a little bit beat up, man. That's a played with football.
It says pro, but it's actually a college ball because it's actually wider and thicker.
Yeah, it's bigger.
So
I was going to ask you that.
Yeah, I had this conversation because I was playing catch with this with my editor out in front of the Georgia Coliseum, and Matt Stinchcomb came by because he knows my editor, and so we were tossing the ball around. He goes, "This isn't a pro ball," and I'm like, "I know, but it says it." He goes, "Yeah, because this is too wide." He says, "Too wide for it to be a pro ball. This is a college ball, actually." So it's a college ball that says NFL on it. So.
And it says Wilson on it. Bloom, that's the universe. The universe is speaking. We got Russell Wilson, we got Jeff Wilson, we got the Wilson football. And Fish coming up at Dick's. Bloom, it's the universe, man.
And this question is, Cecil, and only the fish heads are going to get this. Can you still have fun, Cecil? Can you still have fun?
He's Sigmund Bloom. Follow him on Twitter at Sigmund Bloom. Matt Waldman is at Matt Waldman. I'm at Cecil Lammy. The show is at The Audible. We keep things simple, folks. And we thank everyone out there for listening. Thanks for subscribing on iTunes, listening to us on Stitcher Radio, however you ingest the show. Although, Bloom, I guess you had to apologize on the couch to a wife of one of our loyal listeners. Yes, yes?
Yeah, well, that's a good time to say sorry to Avery again, and anybody else. And we think sometimes, I guess, until that moment, I always just pictured that everybody listening to the show were people that chose to listen to the show. So you asked for it. It's kind of like my wife, you asked for it. You said yes when I asked you to marry me. So I don't really feel sorry for you when I inflict myself upon you. But very nice people like Avery, the wife of one of our loyal listeners, and I'm sure other people out there are listening to the show, maybe even right now, that did not choose to listen to the show.
Maybe she was wishing what's going on in this car here.
Right, sure. And for that, I want to say, if you're listening right now, I'm sorry, and I hope that I hope that you don't hate the sound of my voice, because that makes me feel really sad. But also, this is a chance, for us to say that, what are we up to now? 147 other alternate podcasts we could do. Maybe in the future we could interest you in our celebrity gossip podcast.
I like that. See, we got a little bit of everything for you right here. It is the Audible. And again, if you love the Audible, then check out footballguys.com. Check out our Dominator app, which is dominating the App Store, by the way. And number 2 in all paid iPad apps behind Minecraft. Are you kidding me? Yeah, of course. Why? Yeah. Why is it doing that? It's doing it because it's awesome, and it's highly rated and very popular, and people love it. And once you use the Dominator app, it's going to change the way that you draft. So check out footballguys.com. If you want to dip your toe in the water, a couple of ways to do that. $4.99 in the App Store. Go grab the Dominator app. Go grab our Fantasy Football Magazine, which is also an app for your tablets now. Nobody paper. Rag. Get the rag out of here. Give me the tablet, baby. And the video capabilities therein. Also check out our free daily newsletter at footballguys.com. Again, dipping your toe in the water, and then become a Football Guys Insider Pro. It's the logical steps for everything, man. If you love what we do here...
One of us. One of us.
There we go. He's Sigmund Bloom. He's Matt Waldman. He's Gene Bramall. I'm Cecil Lammy saying WNBC and stay frosty.